What if your dream trip, the one you'd worked tirelessly for, turned into a humiliating public spectacle before the plane even left the gate? For 17-year-old Imani Johnson, a bright honor student on her way to a prestigious summer program, this nightmare became a shocking reality. One flight attendant, one ugly prejudice, and one brave young woman who said, "Not today." This isn't just a story about a disputed seat. It's about courage, the abuse of power, and the moment a teenager decided to ground an entire flight rather than submit to injustice. Stay tuned, because the turbulence you're about to witness happens on the ground, and the karma that follows is one for the history books. Imani Johnson clutched her backpack, the straps digging slightly into her shoulders. Inside, alongside her laptop and a well-loved copy of Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, was the acceptance letter that felt like a golden ticket. Entry into a highly competitive astrophysics summer program at MIT. Her heart did a little flip-flop of excitement mixed with a healthy dose of nerves. This was it, the culmination of years of late-night studying, extra credit projects, and an unshakable fascination with the cosmos. She navigated the bustling C concourse of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the busiest airport in the world, its sheer scale usually a source of wonder, but today just a necessary labyrinth to conquer. Her flight, Starlight Airlines SA-385 to Boston, was boarding in 20 minutes from Gate C-27. Her parents had been a whirlwind of proud tears and last-minute advice that morning. "Hold your head high, baby girl," her father had said, his voice thick with emotion. "You earned this, don't let anyone make you feel small." Her mother had simply squeezed her tight, a silent prayer of protection. Imani found her gate, a small oasis of relative calm amidst the surrounding chaos. She checked her boarding pass again, seat 7A window, just as she'd meticulously selected months ago. She loved window seats, the chance to watch the world shrink beneath her, a tangible reminder of the vastness she was so eager to explore, both literally and academically. Now boarding zone 2, a gate agent's voice crackled over the PA system. That was her zone. Imani joined the queue, a polite smile on her face, her anticipation building. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the sterile, slightly cool air of the aircraft washed over her. She found row 7 and paused. A middle-aged white woman was already in 7B, the aisle seat, and a man was in 7C. Imani offered a small smile. "Excuse me, I have 7A." The woman in 7B barely glanced up from her magazine. Imani carefully maneuvered past her, stowing her backpack under the seat in front of her, and settled in. The window was a little smudged, but the view of the ground crew bustling below was clear. She pulled out her phone to send a quick boarded text to her family. That's when she heard it. A voice, crisp and condescending, cut through her momentary peace. "Excuse me, miss. I think you might be in the wrong seat." Imani looked up. A flight attendant, blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, name tag reading Carol, stood in the aisle, arms crossed, a look of thinly veiled impatience on her face. Carol was probably in her late 40s, her makeup immaculate, her uniform starched to perfection, but her eyes held a chill that belied the forced smile on her lips. Imani blinked, confused. "Oh no, I have 7A, she said, reaching for her phone to show her boarding pass. "See?" Carol waved a dismissive hand, not even bothering to look at the phone. "Yes, well, this seat is not for you. We need this seat for operational reasons. There's another seat for you further back." Imani frowned. Operational reasons? What kind of operational reasons? She knew her rights. She'd paid for this specific seat selection. "I selected this seat when I booked my ticket." Carol's smile tightened, becoming more of a grimace. "Look, it's complicated. We just need you to move. There's a nice seat for you in row 28. Row 28. Likely a middle seat by the lavatories if Imani knew anything about last-minute seat assignments. A wave of indignation washed over her. This felt off. She glanced at the woman in 7B, who was now watching with open curiosity, her magazine forgotten. The man in 7C had his earbuds in but was also looking. "I'd prefer to stay in my assigned seat," Imani said, her voice polite but firm, just as her father had taught her. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" "The problem," Carol said, her voice dropping slightly, a conspiratorial tone creeping in that made Imani's skin crawl, "is that this particular row has certain requirements, and we need to make a switch. It's for the comfort and safety of all passengers." She leaned in a little closer. "You wouldn't want to cause a delay, would you, dear?" The dear felt like a verbal pat on the head, demeaning and utterly infuriating. Imani's mind raced. Certain requirements? What could that possibly mean? Was it a weight and balance issue? Unlikely for a single seat. Was it reserved for passengers with disabilities? She saw no indication of that. It felt arbitrary. It felt targeted. A cold knot formed in Imani's stomach. She'd experienced microaggressions before. The store clerk who watched her too closely. The teacher who expressed surprise at her articulate essay. But this was blatant, public. "I believe I meet all the requirements to sit in a seat I paid for," Imani stated, her gaze unwavering. "Could you please explain what specific requirement I don't meet for seat 7A? She made sure her voice was loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear clearly. Carol's face flushed a dull red. "Now, listen here, young lady. I don't have time to argue. I'm the flight attendant on this aircraft, and I'm telling you to move. We have a schedule to keep." Her voice rose in volume, drawing more attention. "And I'm a ticketed passenger with an assigned seat," Imani countered, her own voice remaining surprisingly steady, despite the adrenaline now coursing through her veins. "I'm not moving unless you can provide a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason, as per Starlight Airlines' own carriage contract, which, by the way, I've read." This seemed to throw Carol off balance. The flight attendant clearly hadn't expected the teenager to be so well-informed or so resilient. Other passengers were now openly staring, some murmuring amongst themselves. The woman in 7B shifted uncomfortably. "Are you refusing to comply with a crew member's instruction?" Carol snapped, her composure starting to crack. This was a serious accusation, one that could get a passenger removed from a flight. Imani took a slow, deliberate breath. "I am refusing to be unjustly moved from my assigned seat without a valid explanation. If you believe I am a security risk or violating a specific FAA regulation by sitting here, please state it clearly. Otherwise, I am staying put." A younger flight attendant, Sarah, with kind eyes and a name tag that read trainee, approached tentatively from the galley. "Carol, is everything okay?" Carol shot her a withering glare. "Everything is under control, Sarah. Go back to your duties." She turned back to Imani, her voice like ice. "This is your final warning. Move, or I will have you removed from this flight." Imani felt a tremor of fear, but also a surge of determination. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about respect. It was about standing up to a bully. She thought of her parents' words, of the sacrifices they'd made. She thought of the countless small injustices that people who looked like her endured daily. "Then you'll have to have me removed," Imani said, her chin held high. "Because this seat is for me." The cabin, which had been humming with the low thrum of boarding passengers, seemed to fall into a stunned silence. The only sound was the faint hiss of the air conditioning and the distant rumble of another plane taking off. Carol's eyes narrowed into slits. "Fine," she spat. "You've made your choice." She spun on her heel and marched towards the cockpit, her steps sharp and angry. The woman in 7B finally spoke, her voice hushed. "Are you okay, honey? That was intense." Imani offered a shaky smile. "I will be." But as she watched Carol disappear behind the cockpit door, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if this flight attendant was actually vindictive enough to get the flight turned around, to ruin everything she'd worked for, all over a seat? The thought was terrifying, but the alternative, backing down, accepting the humiliation, was unthinkable. She had drawn her line in the sand, or rather in the plush blue fabric of seat 7A. The storm had just begun. The minutes after Carol stormed off towards the cockpit stretched into an eternity. Passengers continued to board, but a palpable tension now hung in the air around row 7. Whispers followed Imani like little gusts of wind. Some faces showed sympathy, others annoyance at the brewing delay. Imani focused on her breathing, trying to project an outward calm she didn't entirely feel. Her phone, still in her hand, felt like both a lifeline and a potential weapon. If things escalated, she was ready to record. The woman in 7B, who introduced herself as Diane, offered a supportive smile. "You're handling this with a lot of grace, dear. She had no right." "Thank you," Imani murmured, appreciating the small kindness. Soon, Carol returned, no longer alone. Flanking her was the first officer, his brow furrowed, and a stern-faced gate agent clutching a walkie-talkie. The captain, Imani presumed, was still in the cockpit, likely being fed Carol's version of events. "Miss Johnson," the first officer began, his voice professional but firm. "I'm First Officer Miller. Flight Attendant Carol has informed us that you are refusing to comply with a crew instruction regarding a seat reassignment." Imani met his gaze directly. "First Officer Miller, I am in my assigned seat 7A, which I paid for. Flight Attendant Carol has demanded I move to row 28, citing vague operational reasons and requirements for this row that she refuses to specify. I have asked for a clear, legitimate reason for this demand, and she has provided none, only threats to remove me from the flight." Carol interjected, her voice sharp. "She's being disruptive. She's questioning my authority and holding up the flight." "I am not being disruptive," Imani stated calmly. "I am asserting my rights as a passenger. If there's a legitimate safety or security reason I cannot sit here, please articulate it. For example, am I in an exit row and unable to perform the duties? This is not an exit row. Is there a weight and balance issue that specifically requires me, out of all passengers, to move from this particular seat? If so, please show me the manifest calculations. I am simply asking for transparency." First Officer Miller looked from Imani to Carol, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He seemed to be a man who valued procedure. "Carol, what are the specific operational reasons?" Carol stammered for a moment, her earlier bluster deflating slightly under his direct question. It's a preferred seating zone, and we had a last-minute request from a high-status frequent flyer who needed to be moved up, and the computer assigned her to the back to accommodate." A low murmur rippled through the nearby passengers. This explanation felt flimsy, especially delivered with such hesitation. Imani seized on it. A high-status frequent flyer, so this isn't about safety or operational reasons directly related to the aircraft, but about customer preference? Is it Starlight Airlines' policy to downgrade a confirmed seat-selected passenger for another passenger's convenience, especially without discussion or compensation? And if so, why was I singled out? Were other passengers in this preferred zone who are not high status asked to move first? She saw Diane in 7B shake her head slightly. No, she hadn't been asked. The gate agent, whose name tag read Mark, spoke into his walkie-talkie in hushed tones. He looked stressed. The pressure to maintain on-time departures at Hartsfield-Jackson was immense. First Officer Miller rubbed his temples. "Ma'am, regardless of the initial reason, we now have a situation where a crew member has given an instruction. For the secure and orderly operation of this flight, we need compliance." He was trying to de-escalate, to find a path of least resistance. "How about this? We can offer you a seat in our Comfort Plus section, row 10, also a window, and a travel voucher for future use. Will that resolve this?" It was a tempting offer. Row 10 was an upgrade. The voucher would be useful. A part of Imani just wanted this ordeal to be over. She wanted to get to Boston, to her program. But then she looked at Carol, who was watching with a smug, triumphant expression, as if to say, "See? I knew you'd cave." And Imani knew she couldn't. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about the principle. If she backed down now, it would validate Carol's behavior. It would tell Carol that it was okay to treat people this way, to target them, to abuse her minimal authority. "First Officer Miller," Imani said, her voice still quiet but unwavering. I appreciate the offer, but my concern is not about the seat's comfort level. It's about why Flight Attendant Carol felt it appropriate to demand I move from my legally assigned seat with no valid reason, and to do so in such a disrespectful and frankly discriminatory manner. If I move now, it concedes that her actions were acceptable. They were not. Discriminatory? Carol shrieked, her voice cracking. How dare you? I am not discriminatory. I was following procedure. What procedure? Imani challenged. The procedure to remove a young black woman from a preferred seat because you assumed she didn't belong there or wouldn't fight for her right to be there. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Several passengers gasped. Diane in 7B nodded slowly. You know, Diane said, speaking up clearly for the first time to the crew. She did seem to single this young lady out immediately. Didn't even look at her boarding pass. Just told her the seat wasn't for her. Carol whirled on Diane. Stay out of this. You don't know what you're talking about. First Officer Miller held up a hand. Carol, enough. He looked back at Imani, his expression grave. Miss Johnson, we are at an impasse. The captain has been informed of the situation. If you do not voluntarily move, he will have to make a decision that could involve law enforcement or deplaning all passengers to resolve this. This was the nuclear option, grounding the flight, hundreds of people inconvenienced. Imani felt a wave of nausea. This was spiraling. Was she being stubborn, or was she standing for something vital? I understand the consequences, Imani said, her voice barely a whisper but filled with conviction. And it is not my desire to inconvenience anyone. My desire is to be treated with dignity and respect, and for Flight Attendant Carol to acknowledge that her initial demand was improper and based on an unfair assumption. If the captain needs to deplane everyone to investigate why one of his flight attendants is attempting to unjustly remove a passenger, then perhaps that's what needs to happen for Starlight Airlines to address this kind of behavior. She then did something that surprised even herself. She pulled out her phone, unlocked it, and discreetly hit the audio record button, placing it screen down on her lap. She wasn't sure if it was legal, but in that moment she felt she needed some kind of objective record. First Officer Miller sighed, a deep, weary sound. He spoke into his own headset, presumably to the captain. The entire cabin was now silent, all eyes fixed on the drama unfolding in row 7. Imani could feel the weight of their stares, a mixture of anger, curiosity, and a surprising amount of dawning respect from some. After a moment, Miller nodded. The captain has made a decision. He paused, letting the tension ratchet up. We will not be forcibly removing you, Miss Johnson. However, due to the unresolved conflict and the procedural uncertainties it has raised regarding passenger seating and crew directives, we cannot depart until this is fully clarified by ground staff and airline management. Flight Attendant Carol, you will also be interviewed by operations personnel. He looked around at the other passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that Flight SA 385 is currently grounded. We will be deplaning shortly while the airline resolves this issue. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off and further instructions are given. We apologize for the significant delay this will cause. A collective groan went up from the passengers. Some swore under their breath. Others looked at Imani with open hostility. A few, however, gave her small, almost imperceptible nods of support. Carol looked horrified, then furious. Her face was a mask of rage. This is ridiculous. You're grounding the flight because of her? She seethed, pointing a trembling finger at Imani. We are grounding the flight, Carol, First Officer Miller said, his voice cold. Because a serious allegation has been made, and a passenger is refusing a directive based on what she believes are unjust grounds. This needs to be sorted out by people whose job it is to sort these things out, and that can't happen with a plane full of passengers waiting to depart. The gate agent, Mark, was already speaking rapidly into his radio, no doubt coordinating the deplaning process and alerting the necessary authorities within the airline. Imani closed her eyes for a brief second. She had done it. She had stood her ground and in doing so had brought an entire Boeing 737 to a halt. A terrifying, empowering feeling washed over her. She had spoken her truth, and now the consequences would unfold for her, for Carol, and for Starlight Airlines. The flight was officially grounded, not by a mechanical failure or weather, but by a 17-year-old girl who simply refused to be told, "This seat's not for you." The deplaning process was an awkward, tense affair. Passengers filed past row 7, many casting curious or resentful glances towards Imani. She kept her gaze fixed forward, trying to appear composed, though her insides were a turmoil of conflicting emotions, fear, vindication, and a growing sense of exhaustion. Diane gave her hand a reassuring squeeze as she left. "You did the right thing, honey. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Once the aircraft was empty of passengers, Mark, the gate agent, approached Imani. "Miss Johnson, Miss Carroll, First Officer Miller, could you please come with me? We have a quiet office where we can discuss this further with the station manager and a corporate security liaison." Imani nodded, gathered her backpack, and followed them off the plane and back into the bustling terminal. A strange little procession of accuser and accused. Carol walked stiffly, her face pale and drawn, refusing to make eye contact with Imani. They were led to a small, windowless office tucked away behind the Starlight Airlines customer service desk. Waiting for them were 2 more individuals. A woman in a sharp business suit who introduced herself as Miss Davies, the Atlanta station manager for Starlight Airlines, and a stern-looking man named Mr. Henderson from corporate security. The next hour was a grueling interrogation, though they called it an information-gathering session. Miss Davies, a seasoned professional, began by interviewing Imani. She listened patiently, taking copious notes as Imani recounted the entire incident, from Carol's initial approach to the first officer's decision to deplane. Imani was careful to stick to the facts, to describe Carol's tone and specific words as accurately as possible, and to explain her own reasoning for refusing to move. She mentioned her knowledge of the airline's contract of carriage and her polite requests for a valid reason. She did not, however, mention the audio recording on her phone, holding that back as a last resort. "So, to be clear, Miss Johnson," Miss Davies said, her expression neutral, "you felt Flight Attendant Carol's request was not based on legitimate operational needs, but on a discriminatory assumption about you." "Yes, ma'am," Imani replied. "She didn't check my boarding pass initially. She simply told me the seat wasn't for me and offered a clearly inferior replacement." Her explanation shifted from operational reasons to requirements for the row to finally, under questioning from First Officer Miller, something about a high-status frequent flyer. "It felt like she was trying to get rid of me from that seat, and I believe my race played a part in her assumption that I wouldn't belong there, or wouldn't challenge her." Next, Carol was questioned. Imani and First Officer Miller were asked to wait outside the small office to ensure her testimony wasn't influenced. Imani sat in the slightly more comfortable chair of the gate agent's unoccupied workstation. First Officer Miller pacing nearby, occasionally muttering into his phone. The minutes crawled by. From inside the office, though muffled, Imani could hear Carol's voice, at times raised and indignant, at others quavering. It seemed her story was not holding up well under scrutiny. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Imani or the airline officials in the room, the story was already starting to leak out. Several passengers from Flight SA 385, annoyed by the delay and intrigued by the drama, had taken to social media. "Flight SA 385 from ATL to BOS grounded," one tweet read. "Apparently a flight attendant tried to kick a black girl out of her seat. Girl refused, now we're all deplaned. Wild." Attached was a blurry photo taken from a few rows back, showing Imani in her seat and Carol standing over her. Another passenger, a business traveler named Ben, had a slightly different take, but corroborated the core facts. "Major delay on Starlight SA 385, some dispute over a seat. Young lady very articulate FA seemed aggressive. Captain deplaned us all. Gonna miss my meeting. #Starlight Airlines #travel nightmare. A few passengers who had been closer and overheard more of the exchange were even more direct in their support for Imani. One, a law student named Maria, posted a longer thread on X, formerly Twitter. Witnessed something pretty awful on SA 385. FA, Carol, blonde, severe bun, told a young black teen her paid-for seat wasn't for her. Teen calmly asked for valid reasons. FA escalated, made vague claims. Teen held her ground, cited airline policy. FA wanted her removed. Instead, captain grounded flight. Station manager now involved. This teen is my hero. At Starlight Airlines, you need to look into Carol. This was not okay. Maria's thread started gaining traction, with retweets and comments pouring in, many demanding answers from Starlight Airlines. Inside the office, Carol's defense was crumbling. When pressed by Miss Davies and Mr. Henderson about the high-status frequent flyer, she couldn't produce a name or a specific request that had come through official channels for that particular seat. Her claim that it was a computer assignment also fell apart when Mr. Henderson, who had access to the booking systems, found no such override or note on Imani's reservation or for seat 7A. "So, Carol," Miss Davies said, her voice now carrying a distinct edge, "it appears there was no high-status passenger request for that seat. It appears there were no overriding operational directives from the flight deck or ground control regarding that seat. Can you explain, then, why you were so insistent on Miss Johnson moving?" Carol became flustered. I just thought, sometimes there are last-minute adjustments for weight and balance with cargo, and I assumed I wanted to be proactive." Mr. Henderson interjected. "Flight attendant Carol, the weight and balance for SA 385 was confirmed and green-lit an hour before boarding, and even if there were a last-minute adjustment, it would typically involve moving multiple passengers or cargo, not targeting a single passenger in a non-critical seat with no explanation." Carol was trapped. Her lies were unraveling, exposing the ugly truth underneath. She had made an assumption based on prejudice. She had seen a young black woman in a good seat and decided she didn't belong. Finally, Miss Davies asked First Officer Miller to recount his involvement. He laid out the facts objectively, his attempt to mediate, Imani's calm demeanor and articulate responses, Carol's escalating agitation and inconsistent explanations, and ultimately the captain's decision to deplane to allow for a proper investigation without further inflaming the situation on board or causing an excessive delay with passengers captive on the tarmac. "And First Officer Miller," Miss Davies asked, "in your professional opinion, did Miss Johnson pose any threat, behave disruptively, or give any indication that she was a security risk?" "Absolutely not," Miller stated firmly. "She was remarkably composed and articulate under pressure. She was assertive about her rights but never aggressive or threatening. The disruption, as far as I could tell, stemmed from Flight Attendant Carol's handling of the situation. This was a damning assessment from a fellow crew member. After nearly 2 hours, Miss Davies and Mr. Henderson concluded their initial interviews. Miss Davies addressed Imani first. "Miss Johnson, thank you for your patience and cooperation. Based on our preliminary findings, it appears your version of events is strongly corroborated by the evidence and other testimonies. We sincerely apologize for the distress this incident has caused you. Flight Attendant Carol's actions were not in line with Starlight Airlines policies or our commitment to customer respect and dignity." She then turned to Carol, her expression hardening. "Carol, you are being placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. You will need to surrender your company ID and access badges to Mr. Henderson. You will be contacted by HR regarding the next steps." Carol looked as though she'd been struck. "Administrative leave? But I have a flight to Orlando tomorrow. This is an overreaction. She's just a kid who—" "Miss Carol." Mr. Henderson cut her off, his voice like steel. "This kid, as you call her, brought forward a very serious complaint that so far appears to have considerable merit. The grounding of an aircraft is a significant event with major financial and reputational repercussions for this airline. We take such matters extremely seriously. Your cooperation with the ongoing investigation is mandatory." Imani watched as Carol, visibly trembling, handed over her badge. The smugness was gone, replaced by a dawning look of fear and disbelief. It was a swift, decisive action from the airline, at least for now. Miss Davies then addressed Imani again. "Miss Johnson, we will of course get you on the next available flight to Boston. We can book you into first class as a small token of our apology. We will also be providing you with a formal written apology and discussing further compensation for this unacceptable experience." Imani nodded, a wave of relief washing over her. "Thank you, Miss Davies. That means a lot." She was exhausted but felt a sense of justice, however preliminary. As Imani was being escorted by a now very solicitous gate agent to the first-class lounge to await her new flight, her phone buzzed. It was a notification from X. Maria, the law student passenger, had tagged Starlight Airlines in her thread, and the airline's official account had just replied, "At Starlight Airlines, we are aware of the incident on SA 385 from ATL. We sincerely apologize to the affected passengers, especially the young woman involved. Discrimination has no place at Starlight Airlines. We are taking this matter extremely seriously and have launched an immediate investigation. The crew member in question has been removed from duty pending the outcome." The story was out, and Starlight Airlines was already in damage control mode. The uprising, sparked by one teenager's courage, was now digital, and it was spreading like wildfire. The full extent of the karma, however, was yet to unfold. While Imani waited in the relative tranquility of the Starlight Airlines first-class lounge, attempting to decompress and process the whirlwind of the past few hours, the digital storm she'd inadvertently unleashed was growing into a hurricane. Maria's X thread had exploded. Major news outlets, always hungry for stories of injustice and David versus Goliath confrontations, began picking it up. Hashtags like #StarlightScandal, #FlyingWhileBlack, #Justice for Imani, and #Ground the Prejudice were trending. Imani's phone, which she'd finally had a chance to charge, was buzzing incessantly with notifications, friend requests, and messages of support from strangers around the world. Some shared their own experiences of discrimination while traveling. Others praised her courage and composure. Her parents, initially frantic after seeing the first few social media posts, had finally gotten through to her. Their relief at hearing she was safe and their immense pride in how she'd handled herself was a balm to Imani's frayed nerves. "We saw what people are saying, baby girl." Her father's voice, thick with emotion, came through the phone. "You stood up not just for yourself, but for so many others. We are so proud of you. But are you truly okay?" "I'm okay, Dad. Tired, but okay," Imani reassured him. "The airline is actually handling it pretty seriously so far. They put me in first class for the new flight to Boston, and they're talking about compensation." Meanwhile, at Starlight Airlines headquarters, the situation was escalating into a full-blown PR crisis. The swift public statement and Carol's suspension were good first steps, but the sheer volume of negative attention was staggering. The airline stock price took a small but noticeable dip in after-hours trading. Crisis management teams were assembled, and the legal department braced for impact. The internal investigation into Carol, led by Mr. Henderson from corporate security and a senior HR manager named Miss Albright, was fast-tracked. They weren't just looking at the SA 385 incident. They were digging into Carol's entire employment history with Starlight Airlines, a tenure spanning nearly 15 years, and they began to find cracks. Carol, it turned out, was not the exemplary employee her polished exterior suggested. Over the years, there had been several passenger complaints lodged against her, 3 to be exact, that had been formally documented. 2 involved rudeness and what passengers described as an unnecessarily confrontational attitude. 1, more troublingly, involved a complaint from a Hispanic family who claimed Carol had spoken to them in a demeaning manner and had been unhelpful when their child, who had special needs, required assistance. These past complaints had been addressed with verbal warnings and a mandatory customer service refresher course for Carol, But none had resulted in disciplinary action beyond that. Viewed in isolation, and with Carol's vehement denials and smooth explanations at the time, they hadn't raised major red flags. But now, viewed through the lens of the SA 385 incident and Imani's detailed, credible testimony, a pattern began to emerge. A pattern of prejudice, abuse of minor authority, and a particular disdain for passengers she perceived as less than. Then came a more significant discovery. Mr. Henderson, meticulously reviewing Carol's crew reports and expense claims, noticed irregularities. Small things at first, slightly inflated meal expenses on layovers, claims for services that seemed unlikely. But one particular pattern caught his eye. Carol frequently reported lost or damaged items from the onboard service cart, particularly miniature bottles of premium liquor and high-end snacks. The numbers were consistently higher on flights she worked compared to other crews on similar routes. Digging deeper, Henderson cross-referenced these reports with onboard inventory logs, and even discreetly checked security footage from crew areas and airports where Starlight had its own lounges and facilities. While there was no single smoking gun video of her pocketing items, the circumstantial evidence, combined with the frequency of the losses when she was on duty, painted a compelling picture of petty theft, likely for personal use or perhaps even resale. It wasn't grand larceny, but it was a serious breach of trust and company policy. This discovery, unrelated to the discrimination complaint but unearthed because of the intense scrutiny it triggered, added another layer to the case against Carol. It suggested a broader character issue, a sense of entitlement and a willingness to exploit her position for personal gain, however minor. While the internal investigation was unearthing Carol's past, Imani finally boarded her new flight to Boston Starlight Airlines Flight SA 912. She was, as promised, seated in first class, 1A. The flight attendants on this new flight were almost overly solicitous, their smiles wide, their offers of drinks and snacks frequent. Imani knew they'd likely been briefed. She accepted their kindness with grace, but a part of her remained wary. As SA 912 taxied for takeoff, Imani looked out the window. Hartsfield-Jackson, the scene of her ordeal, receded below. She felt a profound sense of relief, but also a lingering sadness that such a confrontation had been necessary. Upon landing in Boston, she was met by a representative from her MIT summer program, who had been alerted by Imani's parents and Starlight Airlines about the delay and the reason for it. Professor Davies, the program director herself, was there, her expression a mixture of concern and admiration. "Imani," Professor Davies said warmly, taking her hand. "We are so glad you're here. We heard about what happened. You showed incredible strength. Please know that you are welcome here, and we are all immensely proud to have you join us." The genuine warmth and support began to melt away the last of Imani's tension. She was finally where she was meant to be. Back in Atlanta, the investigation into Carol concluded within 48 hours. The evidence was overwhelming. Imani's testimony, corroborated by First Officer Miller, Diane, the passenger in 7B, who had emailed a statement to the airline after seeing their ex-post, and the social media outcry, established the discriminatory nature of her actions on SA 385. The historical complaints showed a pattern, and the discovery of the petty theft sealed her fate. Miss Albright from HR and Mr. Henderson scheduled a formal meeting with Carol and her union representative. The mood was somber. "Carol," Miss Albright began, "we have completed our investigation into the incident on Flight SA 385 on June 2nd, and a broader review of your employment record. The findings are serious. Regarding Flight SA 385, we found credible evidence that your actions towards Miss Imani Johnson were unprofessional, discriminatory, and a violation of company policy regarding passenger treatment and respect. Your explanations for demanding she move seats were inconsistent and ultimately found to be without factual basis." Carol started to protest, "But Miss Albright held up a hand. "Furthermore, the investigation has uncovered a pattern of irregularities concerning onboard supplies and discrepancies in your expense reporting. indicative of a breach of trust and potential theft of company property. Coupled with previous documented passenger complaints about your conduct, the company has lost confidence in your ability to perform your duties to the standard Starlight Airlines requires and to represent our values. Carol's face, which had been defiant, began to crumble. Her union representative looked grim. He knew a losing battle when he saw one. Therefore, Miss Albright continued, her voice firm but devoid of malice, Starlight Airlines is terminating your employment, effective immediately. The words hit Carol like a physical blow. 15 years of her life, her career, her identity, gone. She had built her world around the uniform, the perceived status, the ability to travel. Now it was all being stripped away, not just because of one incident with a teenage girl, but because that one incident had pulled back the curtain on a career peppered with smaller transgressions and a deeply ingrained prejudice she had refused to confront. The hard karma had arrived. Carol, who had tried to make Imani feel small and out of place, now found herself truly out of place, unemployed, disgraced, and facing a future far different from the one she had envisioned. The viral verdict from the court of public opinion had been swift, but the internal verdict from Starlight Airlines, based on cold, hard facts, was final. Imani, settling into her dorm room in Cambridge, Massachusetts, read the official press release from Starlight Airlines. It detailed the termination of the flight attendant involved and announced a company-wide review of anti-discrimination and sensitivity training, with a specific commitment to partner with civil rights organizations to improve their practices. They also publicly reiterated their apology to Imani and stated they had reached a confidential settlement with her and her family, which included a significant contribution to a STEM scholarship fund for underprivileged minority students, made in Imani's name. A small, weary smile touched Imani's lips. It wasn't just about punishment for Carol. It was about change. And maybe, just maybe, her unwilling stand had helped nudge a giant corporation and perhaps a few hearts and minds in the right direction. The termination of Carol from Starlight Airlines was swift and decisive, a direct consequence of her actions against Imani Johnson and the subsequent discoveries during the internal investigation. But the ripples from that grounded flight in Atlanta spread far wider, leading to reckonings on multiple levels. For Carol, life unraveled with alarming speed. The loss of her job was just the beginning. Her identity had been intrinsically linked to her role as a flight attendant. The crisp uniform, the authority, however minor, the globe-trotting lifestyle that, while not as glamorous as some imagined, was a source of pride and stability for her. Now, she was grounded in every sense of the word. News of her firing, though Starlight Airlines didn't release her name publicly due to privacy policies, quickly circulated within the tight-knit flight attendant community. Details, as they often do, leaked. Former colleagues who had also found Carol difficult or overbearing weren't entirely surprised. Those who had been friends, or at least friendly acquaintances, distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with the scandal that had brought such negative publicity to their airline. The petty theft allegations, while not pursued criminally by Starlight to avoid further negative press, hung over her. Finding new employment in the airline industry, or even in customer service, proved nearly impossible. Background checks, even without a criminal record, would likely flag her termination from a major carrier under a cloud of misconduct. The comfortable life she had built began to fray. She had to downsize her apartment, sell her car, and confront the reality that her own actions, her ingrained prejudices, and her sense of entitlement had led directly to her downfall. There were no more operational reasons to hide behind, no more teenagers to try and intimidate. There was only the stark reality of her choices. The karma was not just the loss of a job, but the profound isolation and the crushing weight of her own character flaws laid bare. For Starlight Airlines, the incident was a costly wake-up call. The grounding of Flight SA 385 itself incurred significant operational expenses, rescheduling passengers, crew overtime, airport fees. But the reputational damage was far more severe. Their initial swift response had mitigated some of the fallout, but the story of a black teen being targeted by a flight attendant resonated deeply with a public increasingly intolerant of discrimination. True to their public commitment, Starlight Airlines launched a comprehensive review of their training programs. They brought in diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI consultants, established employee focus groups, and revamped their customer service and conflict resolution modules. First Officer Miller, praised for his handling of the situation on board, was even asked to participate in developing new training scenarios for flight crews, emphasizing de-escalation and fair treatment. The airline made a point of showcasing these changes publicly, understanding that rebuilding trust was a long-term endeavor. The financial settlement with Imani's family, including the scholarship fund, was a tangible part of this, turning a negative event into a positive force for future generations. The incident also became a case study in corporate crisis management, and more importantly, in employee conduct. Airlines across the industry quietly reviewed their own policies and training, not wanting to be the subject of the next viral scandal. For Imani Johnson, life after Flight SA-385 was a mixture of the extraordinary and the refreshingly ordinary. The astrophysics program at MIT was every bit as challenging and exhilarating as she had hoped. She thrived in the academic environment, her quick mind and diligent work ethic impressing her professors and peers. The initial flurry of media attention faded, allowing her to focus on her studies. Yet the experience had changed her. She was more aware, perhaps a little more guarded, but also more confident in her own voice and her ability to stand up for what was right. The support she had received from strangers around the world had been a powerful affirmation. She occasionally received emails or messages from other young people, particularly young women of color, who had been inspired by her story to speak out against injustices they faced in their own lives. She didn't seek out the spotlight, but when approached by student groups or for specific events focused on youth empowerment or civil rights, she would share her story, always emphasizing the importance of knowing your rights, staying calm under pressure, and the collective power of speaking truth to prejudice. The scholarship fund established in her name by Starlight Airlines became a quiet source of pride. She hoped it would open doors for other bright students who, like her, dreamed of reaching for the stars. The woman from Seat 7B, Diane, kept in touch with Imani via email. They had formed an unlikely bond in the crucible of that aircraft cabin. Diane often expressed her admiration for Imani's courage and updated her on how the story had prompted conversations among her own friends and family about casual prejudice. First Officer Miller, on one of his layovers in Boston a few months later, arranged to meet Imani for a coffee with her parents' permission and a program chaperone present. He expressed his continued regret for what she had endured, but also his respect for how she had handled an incredibly difficult situation. "You taught a lot of people a lesson that day, Imani," he told her, "including many of us at the airline. You made a difference." Imani never heard from Carol directly, and she didn't expect to. She held no personal malice towards her, only a sense of sadness that prejudice could drive someone to act so unkindly. Her focus was on her future, a future that seemed limitless, a future she had fought to protect on that tarmac in Atlanta. The grounding of Flight SA-385 was more than just a disruption of travel. It was a disruption of complacency. It forced an airline to confront its failings. It brought down a career built on a shaky foundation of bias. And it propelled a young woman into a role she never asked for, but embraced with grace and strength. The karma that hit Carol was hard and personal, but the ultimate karma was the positive change, however incremental, that rippled outwards, a reminder that sometimes standing firm in one small seat can, in fact, help move the world. Imani Johnson continued to look towards the cosmos, but she now knew that making a difference right here on Earth was just as important, and she was just getting started. And so Imani Johnson's courage didn't just ground a flight, it launched a movement. It sparked a crucial conversation about dignity, respect, and the everyday biases that too often go unchallenged. Carol's actions brought about her own professional demise, a stark reminder that prejudice and abuse of power have real, tangible consequences. But beyond the individual karma, this story shows the incredible power of one individual standing firm in their truth. Starlight Airlines was forced to look inward, to make changes, and to invest in a more equitable future, all because a young woman knew her worth and refused to be diminished. Imani's story is a testament to the fact that you are never too young, never too insignificant, to demand respect and effect change. What did you think of Imani's bravery? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories of resilience and justice. Your voice matters, just like Imani's did. Let's keep the conversation going.